So good evening. A little bit of semantics as we get adjusted to our new facility, but would like to welcome everybody here. My name is Luc Francois, and I'm the co-chair of the Facility Planning Committee. There's many members here tonight. You'll get a chance to meet them shortly, but I'd like to welcome you, and as others come in, please come in and join us. This is a real informal setting. I'm a community member just like yourself, and took on a charge to try to help our facility and district move forward in our planning. Next slide, please. So a quick review of the agenda, and then we'll jump right in. So the question is, why are we here tonight? We are here because we're simply reviewing our data. We're looking at our enrollment projections, and we are learning together about what our needs are in our district. Specifically, what are we planning for in our future? Well, we're here to share what the Facility Planning Committee has been doing for the past 18 months, which is really a lot of work, and it started around creating some guiding principles that we're going to share with you this evening. Once you have those guiding principles, we'll share a little bit of the work that we did on our journey to get to the point tonight where we'll ultimately offer you some options for consideration. We're here to really look at what we can do to accommodate and address our growth. And as we look at that tonight, we're going to share information about some of the preliminary options that we've developed. We've moved the narrow from a list of a wide array of options down to 12 scenarios, down to 3 final options that should be presented later this evening. And we're also here to share some preliminary costs and the associated tax impacts that go along with the projects and the options that we have here for you tonight. Lastly, though, is your feedback is absolutely important. We are here to gather information from you because you're really part of the process to guide our next steps. Our journey by presenting 3 options tonight is another step toward our completion of making a final recommendation, but we need to hear from you to help guide our final steps toward ultimately what we would recommend to our district leadership. So with that, thank you. This is a picture of our current setting in the school district, and really it kind of starts with the process with why we are here. Well, we're here really to start a planning process for our future. We're here to look at our students, our programs, our options, and what it is that we want to offer kids going forward. We're also here because we want to engage the community at large, which is very great to see that we're still coming together here, and this is our 3rd of 3 planning sessions and community forums where we are gathering information. But lastly, we're here because, as the pictures show, we have some overcrowding going on in our schools, and simply put, we need to create some more space. So to help us understand a little bit more about our challenges, please come on in, it's no problem. Thank you. To better understand the need for our space, I'm going to introduce Sherry Syra. She's our assistant superintendent, and she's going to walk us through some of our space needs. So Sherry.
Thank you. So as Luke pointed out, growth is great for our district and allows us to continue our programming, but our challenge really is having enough space to accommodate all of the students that we have in our schools right now. So just kind of taking a quick overview of enrollment growth in recent years, we have grown by more than 750 students since 2012. Our recent enrollment growth has been approximately 2% or more per year since 2009-2010. Projections indicate we will continue to grow. If we continue to grow at the rate we have been since 2009, that will mean 1,000 more students by 2022-23, and more than 2,000 students over our capacity by 27-28. So that's really our challenge. It's finding space for our students. This is a look at our K-12 enrollment projections, and I'm just going to note there's an error here. This is really starting at 2012-13, 13-14, and then 14-15 on. So what that does is it shows you where our enrollment has been back to 2012 when it was just over 6,100 students, and this year we're just over 6,900 students. Again, if we continue to grow at the current rate, then what those projections would look like through 2027-28. And we'll talk a little bit more about where we get those projections in just a moment. So we look at 2 different enrollment projections because they use different methods to look at those enrollment projections. The first thing that we did was we looked at MD Roffers, which is an urban planning company that does projection in terms of enrollments. What they do is they look more at trends. Where do we anticipate the growth to be? And they look at neighborhood by neighborhood. How many empty lots are there? How many students do they anticipate there being per lot when housing is built? how long has a neighborhood been developed? When is the turnover likely to start happening? How fast will that turnover be? What's the typical number of students per unit in that particular development? So they look at every single neighborhood across all 8 municipalities that feed into our district. One of the things that we've seen from that is our projections continue to surpass that, and that even existing neighborhoods are turning over faster and bringing in more new students than is seen in other school districts. So we're seeing more growth for the number of houses that we have than is typical throughout the state. The other piece that we look at in terms of projections is from Applied Population Lab at UW. And what they do is really trend analysis. And so though they update their projections annually, and it's a faster process, but it's more responsive to recent growth, and they give us year-by-year projections. So our current projections that we're using are based on those from Applied Population Labs. And so they have the greatest confidence in their projections up through 5 years out, so up to the 2022-23. And then they'll update them again for us next year based on what we actually see in the fall. Again, their assumption is based on continuing to grow at the current rate. We can't predict future economic growth or not. We can't predict what will happen with housing, but if we continue to grow at this current rate, that's where those enrollment projections will take us. So we'll now break it down kind of level by level. At the elementary level, what this chart shows us is from 2014-15 on what our actual enrollment in red or our projected enrollment in gray is. This dotted line across the top shows our capacity at the elementary level. So across our 6 elementary schools, we have capacity for 2,627 students. We can rarely get to full capacity across all 6 of those schools because students don't move into houses exactly where we have space. So if we have room for 5 more 3rd graders, they don't necessarily just move in where we have that space, right? Families buy homes and then they go to that school. And so it's harder to get to max capacity when we're spreading the students across the 6 elementary schools. By 2022-23, we will be nearly 300 students over capacity. Currently, West Middleton is over capacity significantly. 4 of our other schools, Elm Lawn, Northside, Sauk Trail, and Sunset Ridge, are all within 91 and 98% capacity. Park is the farthest from capacity, but there are developments that will eventually increase enrollment in the park attendance area, just not quite yet. Middle school. So again, here's what our enrollment has been in recent years, what our projections are, and then where our capacity runs across the 2 middle schools. Currently, we are closest to capacity at Glacier Creek Middle School, where we did do the addition, but the internal spaces are still what they were when the school was built. For a smaller number of students. By 2022-23, so again looking at that 5-year marker, we anticipate being nearly 200 students over capacity at the middle school level. You can see we have a slightly smaller class that'll go to 5th grade in 2 years, and then we pick up again. And then at the high school, we're already over capacity. At the high school level, we will be more than 500 students over capacity by 2022-23. And this capacity includes both Middleton High School and our capacity at Clark Street Community School, which is one of our 2 charter schools. Clark Street serves just 9 through 12 students. So they're actually right now just over their capacity as well. And then you can see here we are next year, and then continuing years, you can see how far we get over capacity. So in summary, our enrollment is exceeding our capacity at all 3 building levels. Again, using that 2022-23 marker, where Applied Population Lab has the highest confidence in projections those 5 years out, we'll be nearly 300 students over capacity at the elementary level, more than 200 students over capacity at the middle school level, and more than 500 students over capacity at the high school level. And so again, that's what's brought us all here tonight and to the facilities planning process over the last 5 years. So that's a lot of information in a relatively short period of time. What we would like to do is give you 5 to 8 minutes at each of the tables where we have those of you who are here as community members. We'll have a facilitator at each of the tables to collect notes and then report out to the large group on your conversation. And what we would like you to respond to is share your thoughts and observations on community growth and its impact on our schools, and what questions do you still have. So again, you're going to talk about that at your tables. We'll take notes, and then we'll have a facilitator report out in about, George, you want to do 6? Yeah, we'll do 6 to 8 minutes for that.
I'm George Mavrolis. I'm the superintendent of the school district. And a couple things came up in small group that I do want to address. We have what are called attendance boundaries. And attendance boundaries are internal boundaries that are established that determines which school within our district kids go to. And we will have attendance boundary changes after the November referendum, no matter what. But we have to wait till November to find out what those will be. Because, for example, if the November referendum adds a new elementary school, a 7th elementary school, those boundaries will have to take kids from 6 schools and spread them across 7. If the referendum were to fail, we need a boundary committee that will move kids out of West Middleton and some of our other more crowded schools into our less crowded schools, even though they're all 91 to 98% crowded. Much harder task, that second one. So no matter what, there will be internal attendance boundary changes. The second question I heard coming up in a couple groups was district boundaries. Now, district boundaries are completely independent of municipality boundaries. For example, we have 8 our district boundaries that were established by the state years and years and years ago encompass 8 pieces of 8 different municipalities. And that's the way across the state. So for example, I live off of Highway Q in Northlake, and now the new development right across the street in the city of Middleton goes to Wanakee schools. That's just the way it is. And so we can't say, well, let's send our Springfield kids to Wanakee and let's send our Madison kids back to Madison. They were never in Madison. They've always been in our district. And so it has nothing to do with the community they live in. It's within our boundaries, okay? So I just wanted to point that out. How will we plan for this future? You saw from the enrollment projections, doing nothing is not an option. We're overcrowded at the elementary level, middle level, and high school level in the next few years, already over at the high school level. And we owe it to students, our current students and our future students, to do something about that. Now, this is a timeline of the district planning process, and it goes back to 1996. And I've been here since 1992, so I've lived through every one of these phases. And back in 1996, we had 4,746 students. We now have, I have to go over here to see it, 7,117. In that time period, in 1996, when we had that enrollment, that is the year we opened up Sunset Ridge and Glacier Creek Middle School. So we opened up 2 schools at the same time through a 1994 referendum right here. Then in 2001, through a referendum in, I think it was 99 or 2000, Jill would know, we added Middleton Alternative High School, which is now Clark Street Community School, which is a 110-student school right over here in the parking lot. And we added the addition here, the 3-story wing and the PAC area from the high school. So those things happened within a 5-year period, but those are 17 years ago. Since then, we've had failed referendas, but we did have some referendas that passed that did some additions to all of our elementary schools, current elementary schools. So we did have some additions, some tweaking. That was back in 2005 and 2005. That's primarily where we added lunchrooms and additional capacity. So when the committee, the Facilities Planning Committee, looked at, one of the possibilities was, do we have any more capacity to add on to our existing buildings? other than the high school where we have some land and Glacier Creek, the answer was no at the elementary level because they've pretty much been built out, the schools that we have. So now we get to 2012, which really was the first of this phase. That was when a previous committee, prior to this one, looked at all of our needs. Our needs in those days were primarily at the elementary level and somewhat at the middle level. We knew the high school was coming, but at that time the committee and the Board of Education didn't want to deal with all three levels at that particular time, so they dealt with elementary and middle, and that is when the decision was made to pull fifth graders out of all 6 elementary schools, build on to Glacier, rebuild Cromery, and move fifth graders over there. That took care of the capacity needs at the elementary and the capacity needs at the middle. Because we've also heard at 2 previous community forums, well, why didn't the board deal with the high school at that time? Well, remember now, the population was at the elementary middle school in 2012. Those kids are now here. And we knew that bubble was coming, and we knew this was going to be the next phase. So we are now here in 2017, 2018, looking at elementary needs, high school needs, and middle school emerging needs. So this chart starts September of 2017, but actually these committee members that are here, about 20 of them, they started a year and a half ago. They started September of 2016, and they've been meeting monthly on your behalf, on the behalf of the community, to make these decisions. They have researched, they've toured, they've done all kinds of homework, lots of collaboration. We're going to get more into that, but I can't say enough about the great work that they've done. So that began September 2016. They've been working all the way up. And so where are we now? We are now at the, I'm getting away. We're right here. We're in the community phase. And so this is our final community forum. Then in April, a community-wide survey is going to go out to every resident in the school district. And you are going to tell us what, give us your feedback. And all of that data is going to go to the Board of Education, which will determine, they will use that data to determine what to go to referendum with next November. Okay, so we're right in the middle of that phase. During the summer, they will decide what that referendum question or questions will look like. And then we're on target for a November 6, 2018 referendum. Okay. So again, these are our committee members. I will just tell you a little story. We did a call out. It was August of 2016. We put an ad in the newspaper, and then we also sent kind of a call out to our parents. We were hoping to get maybe 15 volunteers, to go through this entire process. We had 62 volunteers, which again is a real tribute to this community. And so of the 62, we were able to select 20. And what we did is we made sure every area of the district was represented. We made sure that we had a balance of different backgrounds and experiences, some people from business, some people from construction, some people, educators. We had a little bit of everything. And here was our committee. Then we also took the 42 that weren't on the committee, and they have received every agenda, every piece of material. They've been called our key communicators. And so Perry Hibner has kept them in the loop as well. So we kind of have 62 people pretty fully informed, but really those 20 have driven the process. Okay, I think it's your turn.
Thanks, George. As we move into the next segment, what I'd like to do is share a little bit of our journey as a facility planning committee about some of the efforts that we've had to date before we get into the final 3 options. So back, as George said, back in August of 2016, the Board of Education charged the district with forming a facility planning committee. And essentially, we had 3 main purposes. The first was to address that short-term and long-term capacity of our facility needs. The second was then to analyze solutions and look at brainstorming ideas and coming up with some options that would ultimately feed into a recommendation back to the board about what to do with our facility planning. And then lastly is this committee is charged with the opportunity to communicate and engage the community at large with those solutions so that we have a broad discussion happening about where we are going in the future. So a little bit more about our facility planning committee. Our first meeting was September of 2016. Before it's all said and done, we're going to meet approximately 20 times. Out of those 20 times, there will be at least 3 times where we have crossed with the board and done a joint meeting so that we stay parallel with and in sync with our efforts to move forward together. We have been giving regular feedback to the board in the form of summaries of our meetings, and then the board has the opportunity to share some insights, ask some questions that we can then take back to the committee and answer, and we've been a conduit back and forth with the board on a monthly basis. Some of the things that we've done in some of those summaries have included just a wealth of learning together over time about our capacity issues. We have toured just about every school in this district, certainly those that have capacity issues or facility needs. We've had meetings inside of those buildings and toured them to understand the complexities of each one of those sites. We've looked at the growth and enrollment projections, and in fact, we've even challenged those growth projections along with the school board. We thought they were just not, they were maybe too conservative. They weren't really capturing the true capacity that we were realizing in the growth of our neighborhoods, and that actually resulted in a recommissioned study that gave us a little better snapshot and accurate portrayal of what was really happening across our district. We looked at site capacities at each location. We looked at our facility conditions. We had a brief summary of what school financing is and how it works and interacts with referendums and planning for referendums. We looked at the design of schools, 21st century learning opportunities, what does a contemporary learner need in today and tomorrow's students. And we looked at sustainability to make sure that our buildings are operating at an efficient level and at a low cost per unit of energy we put into it as far as creating options and spaces for students. And we also looked at a lot of options from large to small, and we eventually narrowed those options down to some of the options you'll see this evening. What we did not study, and I want to make sure our scope is around capacity, we did not study grade configuration or reconfiguration. That is a charge that's left for our Board of Education once they ultimately decide a solution that is best for our community. That is something that the board would look at a future date. So as we move forward, because of all this learning and all of our efforts, we really needed to stay grounded around 5 guiding principles. And we checked in often and frequently when we were making decisions along the way to check to ensure that our group was moving within these 5 guiding principles. And number 1, we needed to make sure that we address capacity. That was really the driving force of the committee being put together to study the capacity and make sure we're addressing those issues. But within that, we also want to make sure we're creating flexible learning spaces. We're knowing that the shift in education is creating more contemporary learners that need a little bit more space and flexibility and collaboration, critical thinking spaces. So we had to take that into consideration as we were doing some of our planning. We wanted to make sure that our buildings served as a community asset. A lot of our facilities are used around the clock by our community, and so we didn't want to just build to address capacity. We wanted to address community capacity and some of those needs that are throughout our greater community. Incorporating sustainability, again, minimizes those operation costs, and it also creates some efficiencies when we build schools. And lastly, we know we needed to be fiscally responsible. Every one of our committee members are also taxpayers in the community. We wanted to take those tax impacts into consideration as we did our planning. So the next question really drives a lot of our work is what can we do to accommodate our growth in the district? And I credit the board for giving us what we call the blue sky ideas. There really was no limitations put on our thinking. They didn't take anything off the table and said, you cannot consider this option before we started our discussions. We had every option available to us. And we did our due diligence over the last, again, year and a half of narrowing these options. We looked at expanding schools, the physical school space at the elementary level, at the middle school level, specifically Glacier Creek. We looked at expanding the high school. We also did a deeper dive to say, well, what happens when we create an elementary school or a middle school that's a different size than the other elementary or middle across town? How does that change programming? What does that do for the flavor or the culture of that school? We looked at community partnerships and how can we leverage those community partnerships to help address some of our facility needs. We looked at a campus solution at the high school where we might have multiple buildings on this site rather than one large building on this site. We also considered grade reconfiguration. We looked at would it make sense to put the 5th grade back down into the elementary and be a K-5, or is it better to stay at a 5-8? Ultimately, resting on a 5-8 solution is the solution that we wanted to continue to advance. We also discussed phasing and the timing of some of these projects because obviously it's hard to do everything at once, and what are the pros and cons of spreading these projects out over time. Ultimately, all of these ideas were considered. We had multiple exercises, multiple activities that whittled this down from a large list down to really 12 final scenarios that were formulated. But out of those 12, some of those were eventually dismissed, and that was for a variety of reasons, partly going back to our guiding principles. Some of the solutions that we offered just weren't fiscally responsible. We couldn't continue to push those ideas forward and advance them for further consideration. I had mentioned the instructional programming. We knew that if we created a scenario that was going to create inequities in our district, that was something we were trying to avoid. A larger middle school and a smaller middle school not having equitable opportunity for kids as far as programming. We looked at the timing. We know that we have three schools right now that are already over capacity and overcrowded, and some of the solutions didn't address that fast enough, and so we had to dismiss that as not a viable option. Some of them actually limited our capacity over time. It might have addressed the capacity for the here and now, but it didn't really look at the longer term capacity that we're trying to address. And some of the sites simply had constraints that weren't allowing us to build out to the full capacity that we might want to look at. So all of these things taken into consideration allowed us to whittle this project down to really, out of 12 scenarios, out of a multiple group of things that we considered, down to really 3 concrete options that are now advanced tonight for this community forum as part of our workshop to help us determine, are these 3 options viable, and are they something that you'd like to see us continue to advance? Before we talk about the 3 options, what I do want to share is one option that's not on the table tonight. It already came up at one table, and that is that we are not looking at a 2-site high school solution. We're looking at maintaining 1 high school. And the question might be, well, why wasn't that considered? And I just want to address that right up front. We did have a desire to look at that, but the instructional programmings, when you have a large facility like here, where we have, if you see, 194 courses that we offer and 23 advanced placement courses, we knew that we could not reproduce those same programming options in a second high school setting of a different size. And so it just wouldn't allow us, even if we had 2 similar sized high schools, we would not be able to offer all of the programming offerings we are currently offering today. That was a big consideration for us, but there's other things. When you look at a 2-site solution, we were trying to be fiscally responsible. And as we look at a 2-site solution, you have to reproduce gym space, you have to reproduce athletic fields, you have to reproduce the principals, the secretaries, the custodial. You're duplicating everything that's in this building a second time over, and those costs were prohibitive. The other thing that we looked at is the expansion that we have available to us here on this site to build out and to move into spaces that haven't been utilized, compared to looking for another site that currently the school district does not have. That site for another high school would have to be minimally 45 acres to put a high school campus, parking, field, so forth on it. And so we need a large amount of property that we currently don't own, and we do have capacity here to expand and increase our boundaries in this particular footprint. So when we take all of that into consideration, we finally dismissed a second high school option as a viable option going forward at this time. At this time, I'd like to bring up our Director of Business Services, Lori Ames. She is going to share a little bit more of an overview of the preliminary options and talk to you more about what each option entails as we go forward. So, Lori, welcome.
I'm not very good with these. Okay, so as Luke mentioned, my name is Lori Ames, and I'm the Director of Business Services here. And I really have 2 tasks tonight. One, I want to try to talk to you about some of the papers that you have in your in front of you to help you understand how to read them better. And then the other piece is, of course, talk to you a little bit about the fiscal ramifications of the options we're going to be looking at tonight. So you've already gotten a bunch of data, and we're going to give you a whole bunch more. So I want to try to just give you that 30,000 foot, how can I make it a little bit easier for you? So the first thing that I would tell you is that all the options that we're going to look at, all of them involve a new elementary school. So that isn't a variable that changes. Within the elementary school, though, the one variable that does change is that one of the options has a little bit higher capacity. But the fact that there would be a new elementary school is the same in all of them. I'm going to skip down to the high school because that's another easy one. In all 3 options that you're going to look at, it's the same high school option. So it's not like you have to add on the idea of thinking about new alternatives. The high school is the same in all 3. Where you might want to focus more of your attention and maybe focus more of the feedback that you give is what's happening or what's being proposed at the middle school level, because that's where there's a little bit of a difference. Okay, that it's, maybe an addition, maybe some temporary solutions. In all of them, though, you will notice on the piece of paper that we look at, there is a short-term solution to the middle school that requires a long-term solution to the middle school. So that's where I would say you're going to want to focus most of your attention and your comments in understanding the paperwork, knowing that when you walk out the door tonight, you're probably going to spend some more time thinking about it. This just helps you for right now. So when we actually look at the document, there's going to be a lot of cost information on there. And we want to give you some feedback about what the cost information includes and doesn't include. So Matt Primo from Findorf is going to share some of that information for you.
Thanks, Lori. So my name is Matt Primo. I'm with Findorf, and I just want to explain a little bit of what these cost ranges include. The numbers that you have there have three big buckets. So you have a construction side, which is more of the bricks and mortar, that has the flooring, that has the foundation, that also has the windows. And as you look at these pictures here, it's really preliminary. So basically we're looking at square boxes with square footage. We know from cost history over the past few years, and of course we've been in business for a long time, we take that cost history, we look at gyms. We know gyms have higher ceilings, different flooring. We know the price point at that area. We look at science rooms. We know that there's different casework that goes in there. So we take all those components and we come up with a range that's looking at our current 2018 costs. We do also know that in those costs, each one of these comes online in a different time. So we have included, what I want to say, building for the future, so inflation. So we've been using in the high school, the 2021 and 2022 is when those would come online. We built that inflation over there, so that's all included in that construction cost that you see there. The next bucket is design. We know once these, as they're preliminary, as we move forward, we're going to get more detailed information, more pictures. We're going to have walls that show what type of outside, if it's a brick, metal panel, what kind of windows. Once we get those details, those costs all get refined as we move forward. But right now, very conceptual. And then there's the owner side, the district side. We know that we have to include in that total referendum cost, we have to include furniture, so we call it FF&E. So looking at the tables that you're sitting in right now, when you have a new school, you have to bring in new furniture there. We also look at impact costs. So that impact cost is, at a new school, you have to bring in facilities from the city of Middleton. So you're looking at stormwater, you're looking at electrical costs. So those impact costs are all included in those. And then the last piece is IT. You know, as we see all these computers, you have an IT portion there that has to be included. So as you look at these cost ranges, it's a plus or minus 5% on either side. And that's really because we're in a very early stage, again, conceptual, kind of looking at these big boxes. So as we move forward, we're going to hone that cost down as we get more detailed information from the district. So with that, that's kind of what's included in these cost ranges for you guys to go forward to take a look at that.
Thanks, Matt. So all of you should have a piece of paper in front of you that looks like this. Okay, this is an amazing document, and it'll be even more amazing when you walk away from here tonight and you have a chance to really spend some time looking at it. So my goal is to help you understand how to read it a little bit better. So to do that, I need to go on the road show because I don't stand still well. All right, so when we're looking at the document, there's two different ways to read it, okay? The first way is, let's talk about options. Options are what we're looking at doing at all of the levels that potentially would go on a referendum question, okay? It answers the concerns that we have at the different levels. So when you're looking at this, the options are in your columns, okay? So that's how you might see it from a referendum standpoint. But some of you are going to be really interested in also understanding, okay, when I compare the options, what's different at the levels between the options? And so that's your rows. So you'll be able to look across each of the options and say what's happening different at the elementary. Reminder, just capacity. What's happening at the middle school level. And remember I talked about how each of the middle school solutions has an immediate as well as a long-term solution. It talks about that here in terms of here's what's being proposed in the option, and this little box right underneath it, that talks about what the future, required phase would need to look like in order to meet our capacity needs. Okay? And then of course our high school. So that's a really, really great way to be able to analyze the different options by the levels. Now, on the section down here in the middle of the document, that's where we start getting into cost, and I know every single one of you are interested in that. Something I would preface a little bit, just like Matt said, when we put together the cost and tax impact, we're having to do some estimating, right? Because even if we have a successful referendum November, we don't borrow the money in November. Most likely, we wouldn't be borrowing the money that we would need for these various projects until into March or in the spring sometime. So that's a long time for us to be doing some estimates in terms of what's going to happen with interest rates and things like that. And if any of you have been watching what's happening with interest rates in the last month, it can be really variable. So we're doing the best we can as a guess right now what it might look like next spring. So there are some ranges in here based on the numbers that Findorf put together for us. But be aware that there's all sorts of estimating that also goes in determining what that tax impact might be. So what we did is we took each of the projects and the project option costs. So the 142.5 million to the 157, that is the cost range for option 1. We took that cost range and we said the tax impact for every $1,000 of equalized value in your property would be $1.18 to $1.33. And because, to be honest, that doesn't necessarily mean anything to you just off the top, right? We said, okay, let's look at some different property values. And I'm going to we have 100, 300, and 500,000 as examples so that you can see maybe where you would fall in that range. So, for example, in option A, if you had a property equalized value of $300,000, your tax impact would be anywhere from $354 to $399 on an annual basis. Okay? So, we have created that potential tax impact for all three options. That's the middle section. And that is only regarding the costs that Matt just talked about. Design, construction, inflation, the furniture we might need for the buildings. Okay, it's to make the site happen. But you and I both know, based on what happens in our own homes, that if we build a home or we add on to our home, it doesn't take everything into consideration. It doesn't take into consideration the cost just to operate the building. If we build a new elementary school, that's utilities that we didn't have before. That's a principal we didn't have before. That's a clerical administrative assistant that we didn't have before. Those are what we call operational costs that go into running that building that you didn't have before. So we are in the process of calculating for each of these options what that operating cost might be, but we're still working out what those details are. But we said it would not be out of the realm of possibility that those additional costs that we would need just to operate each of these options could be anywhere from $2 to $3 million. And if that's the case, in addition to the mill rate impact that you would see just to get the building site, you would have additional funds to operate it. So, for example, if it was $2.5 million, it would be anywhere from 44 to about 44 cents for every $1,000 you have of equalized value. And for that same $300,000 house, $132 on your property taxes. Now, why this is important for you to know is that when you go to referendum and you go to vote, there's going to be two questions. The first question is going to talk about options. The second question is going to be about operating costs. And what would be the worst thing to have happen is, holy cow, we approve option A, but we vote down any of the operational costs to operate it. So you can't have one without the other. And so that's why we wanted to put a tax impact down here and really make sure that we explained what that operational piece is, because that's a whole second question on the referendum. Can you go? So again, as you're looking at the data and you're listening to Chris, who's from EUA, who happens to be one of our architects, and he's going through and showing you the pictures and actually going through the options in detail, what's just helpful in the back of your mind so that you don't feel quite as overwhelmed, elementary, same in every single option except one of them has a capacity of 650 versus 525. At the high school, it's the same option, so Chris is probably going to explain it once so that you know it's in all three options. And then the middle level is where you're going to see some differences, and that's probably where you're going to want to focus your understanding and questions that you might have. Anybody have any quick questions about the form itself so that you know how to read it? Okay, then I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Lori. I'm Chris Michaud. I'm a senior design architect and planner with Epstein Ewan Architects, and we've been working with the district over the last, I don't know, months, years. It's been a very positive experience to really arrive at some of these options that I'm going to share with you tonight. I'm going to try to go through this and make it so you can understand it. And then afterwards, as we get through this, if there are any questions that weren't clear, feel free to flag me down and I can spell some stuff out for you. Some of the conversation that we have heard, because these options do include a piece of land that the district currently owns adjacent to the Pope Farm site. There's been some questions as to exactly what that is. So we just wanted to take a second to clarify what the district property is and what Pope Farm property is. It's pretty clear in this image here, but so, you know, right here is where you enter Pope Farm, and here's the road which goes up to the observation area. So everything in yellow, that's the Pope Farm property. The district doesn't own this. They're not, they can't build on it, they can't touch it, nothing's going to happen to Pope Farm. The land that's shown white there, marked district property, that's the district property. And there are some stipulations on this property that districts have that we are well aware of with regards to maintaining sight lines from Pope Farm, as well as a couple other things with regards to setbacks. And the options that you see here tonight, I'll take that into account, so we're well aware of that. But just so everyone's clear, we're not building on the Pope Farm site. We potentially would be using the district property adjacent to Pope Farm site. The other thing I think I'd like to just start off with, because we've gotten a little bit of feedback from a couple other groups, is that what you're seeing here tonight is completely conceptual. All right, so while, you know, when this building was built, that's what the drawing might look like, but today we put a lot more detail into these drawings. So what you're seeing here, what we typically do is they're somewhat vague because they haven't been designed yet, right? We have worked with the staff and the administration to understand what the needs are for each one of these options, each one of these facilities. So when we look at what goes into an elementary school, we develop a program of there's this many classrooms, this many toilet rooms, this many gym stations, all that stuff which goes into that, which has a square footage associated with that. And that's sort of the intelligence that's built into these options that we then convey to Matt and his team over at Findorf. And that's where those numbers come from that Matt and Lori shared earlier about the cost of these options. It doesn't mean that an elementary school is going to look like, you know, a rectangle with two belts. You know, it'll be different than that, but for now we're showing these things at a very conceptual level. Same with regards to the high school. You know, we're showing areas where we might add on to the high school, but that doesn't necessarily say that's the final solution for the high school. So let me get into option A. So this is option A. Option A, we're doing three things on three different sites, or at least proposing that on three different sites. The first thing is adding an elementary school to the district property adjacent to Pope Farm. The second thing is adding an addition onto Glacier Creek Middle School. And the third thing would be to do additions and renovations to the high school. I'm going to go through each one of those as we go through this here. So we'll start with the middle school. Slide must have got flipped around, but that's all right. No, we can go to the middle school. That's fine. So the middle school, what we're proposing in this one is that there's an addition to Glacier Creek. And you'll see we're adding 175 students of capacity to the building, and that would make the capacity of Glacier Creek the same as the capacity of Cromery. And you might say, well, you're adding 12 classrooms on, how can it only be 175? Well, there are issues with Glacier Creek which have to do with congestion, circulation, and a lot of internalized learning environments. So classrooms that are surrounded by building, they don't have any windows to the outside, they're being used as classrooms for students, which typically we try not to do, right? We try to make sure that every classroom has access to views and daylight, because we know that it has positive effects on learning. So what we're doing is we're building more space onto Glacier to raise that capacity up, and then we go back in and do systematic or sort of spot renovation work in order to enlarge some of those core function areas.
In addition to the wing being put onto the 6th grade and some other core spaces, we will also take a look at some of those internal classrooms that don't have windows right now and refurbish those. Again, the goal is at Glacier Creek not only to add capacity for 175 students, but to create larger walkways, to create less congestion in areas where there currently is, especially in that current 6th, 7th, and 8th grade wing on the west end of the building, which would become a wing for grade 7 and 8. The other part of option A is an elementary school on the site adjacent to Pope Farm Conservancy. The elementary school would be a K-4 building, just like the other 6 elementary schools we have in the district. There are certain restrictions we have with the site. There are setbacks to the north side of the property and the west side of the property that we have to be aware of, so we can't build in those areas. But again, the site is big enough for either 2 elementary schools or elementary and a middle school. With option A, the current plan is to build an elementary school with capacity for 525 students. That would be approximately 133,000 square feet. And then on the south end of the property, a future middle school would go up there when it's needed. The construction for the elementary school at Pope Farm site would be completed by the fall of 2020, so for the 2021 school year. There have always been questions, and I know it was brought up earlier in the presentation, about boundary changes. Those changes would take place after the referendum in November, when the district finds out if they will have 7 elementary schools or 6, because obviously, depending on what happens, that will impact boundaries, but boundaries will change regardless of whether a referendum succeeds or fails. Option B, just a reminder, first of all, that the high school option is the same in all 3 options. So there's no changes to what we talked about before with the high school option. At the elementary level, again, an elementary school would be built at the Pope Farm site, and it would have room for 525 students. In addition, there would be a wing that would be connected to that building for 5th graders that would also have room for 125 students. The 5th graders that would go to school there would be the students who finish 4th grade at the Pope Farm site, and then at that point, when they get into 6th grade, they would move to one of the other 2 middle schools, Glacier Creek or Cromrie. Superintendent Mavrolis has talked about that there will need to be transition programs in place if we were to do that, to help those students transition to the other middle schools when they get into 6th grade. This is anticipated to be a temporary solution, temporary in the sense that it will change once a future middle school is built on the site. Whether that's in 2022, 24, 26, but at some point down the road. The construction would be completed on that site in the fall of 2020, just like in option A. Otherwise, it looks very similar to what you saw before. Setbacks again on the north and west side of the property. There would be parking in the front, parent and guardian pickup in the front. Buses would go around to the back. There would be a playground as well. But again, and then when a future middle school is built, the 5th grade would be connected both to the K-4 building and to the future 6-8 expanded middle school building. So again, that would be part of option B. And really, so what that does is that provides additional capacity at the middle school level in the short term to help deal with any middle school challenges until a future middle school is built. Option C, again, a reminder that it is the same high school option, adding capacity of 900 students to bring capacity at the high school level to 3,000 students at the current site. Where the changes occur are at the middle school level and also impacting elementary. The plan is still to build an elementary school at the Pope Farm site, a K-4 elementary school, but this time with capacity for 650 students. So the square footage of that building would be about 145,000 square feet, or approximately 12,000 square feet more than the other options. What would end up happening, though, is the district would keep anywhere approximately 125 5th graders at that school until the required future phase is built, and that means a future 5-8 middle school on the site adjacent to Pope Farm and south of the K-4 building. So what does that do for the district? That adds elementary capacity in the long run. So when the new middle school is built, 5th graders would then go to that middle school, And your elementary school on the site adjacent to Pope Farm would have capacity for 650 students, which would make it the biggest elementary school in the district, approximately 125 students larger than some of the other ones. And it would make it what's called a 6-section elementary school, which means you'd have 6 classes of kindergarten students, 6 classes of first grade students, all the way through 4th grade. And so you get that additional capacity to deal with what is expected to be increased capacity at the elementary level over the next decade. And then, so again, in both option B and option C, and even in option A, we are talking about at some point building a 3rd middle school, and that middle school would be housed on the site adjacent to Pope Farm. That middle school would likely have capacity for 900 students, and that would allow us to run similar programming at all 3 middle schools, because all 3 middle schools would be in that 900 to 1,200 student range. So that takes us through all 3 options. The remainder of the 3 workshops were then spent letting attendees get into small groups to talk about what their initial impressions were of each of the options, and then afterwards what their impressions were of the cost for each of the options. We hope you enjoyed this presentation, found it useful. If you have questions, please contact Director of Communications Perry Hibner. His information is on the district website. But again, there will be more information to come, including a survey of community residents in early April. That survey will be mailed to all households in the district, and we hope that everyone will take it to give us a better idea about our facility planning process and to give us an idea what the community is willing to support. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. We hope you found it beneficial.